All right. Hi, everybody. We're going to get this started. I'm Gabriel Metcalf, the CEO of the Committee for Sydney. Thank you for joining another edition of Committee for Sydney Live. Today, featuring the Honourable Dominic Perrottet, Member of Parliament and Treasurer of New South Wales, to share some thoughts about recovery. As you all would know, the committee has been deeply engaged with strategy for social and economic recovery. And of course, much of that work is being led by the Treasurer's Office. So it is a real honor to have him today. Dominic Perrottet has been Treasurer since 2017. And it's probably fair to say he did not at that time know he would be navigating the economy through the biggest recession since the 1930s. We are all dealing with something that maybe some people knew would happen, but most of us probably didn't worry about this as much as we should have in hindsight. So the way this is going to work, for those of you who have done these with us before, we'll turn it over to the Treasurer to make some opening remarks. You can submit questions via the Q&A function on Zoom, and I will do my best to get through those. We will try to end right on time at 11:30 to let the Treasurer get back to saving the economy. Treasurer, thank you for making time for this, and I will turn it over to you now.
Well, thanks, Gabriel, and thanks everybody who's tuning in today. It'd be great to get your feedback and hear from you and take some of your questions in relation to where we're currently sitting and what's the roadmap, the pathway back for the New South Wales economy. But Gabriel, you said probably the biggest recession since the 1930s, but let's also have some perspective here. I believe that every generation has their challenges, and this is ours, and we will get through this, and our state will be stronger at the other end. From our perspective, we've kind of looked at this through the prism of, from a Treasury perspective, which obviously runs kind of an economic perspective, rubs up against health. But from where we sit, we want to make sure we keep as many people in jobs and as many businesses in business. And as part of that, we've kind of had a three-tiered approach. The first has been the response. We're now into the recovery, and obviously there'll be reform off the back end as well. And I guess the stimulus support that we provided over this period of time, around $10 billion in stimulus measures, that's more than any other state jurisdiction, has been very closely tied and complementary to the work and the measures that we've seen at a federal level. But we've obviously been making sure that as many businesses have cash flow. So that's why we've deferred a whole range of taxes, payroll taxes, gaming taxes. And that's really been on engagement with stakeholders, getting a sense of what's going to help them keep their staff on. And that's really where we want to be at the end of it. We get through this period of time that we've got as many businesses employing as many of their staff as they possibly can. Obviously, some of the bigger businesses have some of that payroll tax support. Smaller businesses, we've been giving cash grants to up to $10,000 to help them through this period of time, and the feedback that we've received has been pleasing. And it also, I guess, where we sit now on as we move into the recovery phase is what we've done well, and I think where we're well placed in our state has been to gear up our public health support. And early on in the pandemic, one of the first things we announced was a doubling of our ICU capacity. We've now tripled that. We're on the way to quadrupling that. And that gives us now the flexibility to ease the restrictions that are in place. And I want to give businesses right across the state hope that we are going to get back, and we're going to have as much of our economy operating as possible alongside this virus. We've got to do it in a safe way, a measured way. I don't want to go backwards. We're working very closely, Health and Treasury together, not always agreeing, but reaching compromise. And we announced today, for example, you would have seen pubs and clubs can open. And look, there's these are small. You're talking 10 people at this time, but this is the start. And what I want to do is make sure that we're able to open up as much of our economy as possible in a way that's safe, in a way that people's healthcare is protected. And we are very well placed to do that because of the support and the work that we've done and the investments that we've made in healthcare over this period of time. So it's a challenge, as you said. It's a difficult time for our city, Sydney. It's a difficult time for our state. But whilst given our exposure on tourism and education, whilst Sydney and New South Wales has probably been the hardest hit of any jurisdiction, we're all also, in my view, the best placed state to drive out of this and come out the other side stronger. And if New South Wales does well, then the nation will go well off the back of it. So it's going to be a challenge, but it's one we'll all get through. It's obviously becoming a bit cliched. We're all in it together. We'll all get through this together, and we'll come out stronger the other side.
Okay, very focused. And I have many questions pouring in already, Treasurer. All right, this one from a reporter. I'll read it verbatim for you. The Queensland government has announced it will bid or be part of a bid for Virgin Airlines to keep it in Queensland. Would New South Wales consider a rival bid or taking equity in order to get Virgin to relocate to New South Wales? How important would an anchor tenant like that be for Badger Creek?
Yeah, look, so I've made some statements in relation to Virgin. From our perspective, I think, not just for New South Wales, but for the country, I think it makes, it's better for everybody if we have a competitive airline industry. And that's better for customers, it's better for pricing, it's better for service. So that's obviously something that we've been focusing in the early days prior to administration. Virgin had been in discussions with us on their Abolition. We've appointed Michael Perrottet here as the chair of iCare, former Macquarie Bank exec, to be engaged with the administrators over the course of this period of time. We obviously have Virgin jobs in Sydney, and so from our workforce perspective, that's important for us. Obviously, we saw what Queensland have done today. We'll monitor what they do from this point, but obviously we're certainly engaged, and we want to make sure that we have a competitive airline industry at the back end of this. In terms of the Western Sydney Airport, and obviously that's down the track, but I've always thought it makes eminent sense for Virgin to relocate to the second airport. I think the opportunities in the Aerotropolis are going to be significant for many businesses. We've had substantive international interest in that project, and we want to make sure the more investment we get ahead of the opening of the Aerotropolis, then the more that's going to drive further investment. So that's top of the list. Top of mind. We'll continue to be engaged in the process and monitor it as the administrators field offers and look for equity investment.
Treasurer, what is your view of the national roadmap presented by the PM and the CMO last week?
Positive. I think every state is different, and they'll have different approaches. And in certain areas will go ahead, and certain areas might be further behind because of the nuanced issues that all the different jurisdictions face. For example, I think one of their stage 3 areas was on auctions and the like. Obviously, I'm very focused on making sure the property market remains as strong as possible during this period. And I thought if you saw last week, we had auction clearance rates around 70%. That was up to about 40% the week before. Then would be that, and I'm not saying it's completely due to the open homes there, but I think that gives a lot of confidence that there's a bit of normality out there. We saw reports today, though, in terms of property prices and predictions aren't that great going forward. But it's important because I think every jurisdiction needs to be providing confidence to business that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes, just like when we're giving financial support, people say, well, you've done this, why don't you do this? Or this seems illogical because this doesn't make sense that you line this up. There's nothing logical about dealing with some of the issues that arise during a pandemic. And you've got to make sure, though, that we're working in the right direction. I think some of the announcements you've seen over the course of this week, some kick in tomorrow here in New South Wales, will provide greater confidence to businesses that we're going to get back to as much of normality as possible. But what's most important is that if the National Cabinet and the work that we're doing in our state is to have a significant benefit, we've got to make sure social distancing remains. And I think the public have done a great job, made enormous sacrifices in understanding the importance of that. And the more we do that, the more we can ease the restrictions and the more we can get our economy moving as much as possible. But I'm very confident we've got a good plan in place to start easing these restrictions and get our state back to the place it was before.
One of the top priorities for the Committee for Sydney is to repeal stamp duty. A tax on transactions is extremely inefficient and causes all kinds of negative externalities. We understand you agree. The question is, are you going to introduce legislation to that effect? And if so, what's the timing on that?
Look, for a number of years now, I've been championing the case for the abolition of inefficient state taxes. And it holds back and impedes our economic growth. Stamp duty and payroll tax are two of those taxes. The GST also has its issues, whilst I'm certainly open for reform on the GST as well. But we can't do these things in isolation, in my view, and I've been in regular contact with the Federal Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, around how can we work together to change the tax system in a way that is structured where, as much as possible, we have a system that promotes efficiency, promotes productivity and jobs growth and economic growth off the back of it. And at the moment, as you say, Gabriel, taxes like stamp duty are terrible taxes. They they halt the transfer of property. Now, people have said, is this an opportunity? Does the pandemic provide an opportunity to reform? No, we have an obligation to reform our system. We owe it to future generations to make sure we take on the tough decisions to set up our state for success. The Commonwealth have skin in the game because if the states go well, the Commonwealth goes well off the back of it. And if we don't have the political will now to make the tough decisions in relation to tax reform, well, we may as well pack up our bags and go home because we're in the wrong game. This is not about focusing on the politics of the day-to-day. This is about making decisions that will set our state and nation up for future success. Now, in terms of the practicalities of getting some of these reforms over the line, I think we've done a great job in laying the foundation and the need for change. We have our review of federal financial relations, which David Thodey is chairing, which is due to provide its report to the state, to me in June this year. That will have a range of recommendations across a whole lot of areas. Taxation reform is one of them. I'd be surprised if stamp duty wasn't included in the recommendations. And in addition to that, there is also the work we've been doing to the Productivity Commission. Peter Orchestra, who will provide his report to the government later in the year. A lot of those recommendations have already been taken on by Rob Stokes in the planning area, and there's a substantive focus there about how do we, one thing's tax, one thing's getting government out of the way, reducing regulation, cutting red tape, allowing businesses to prosper and thrive and employ people. We talk about having a strong economy. I think we're now realising the importance of why because it provides the opportunity for people to have a job, to provide for their families, to put food on the table. That's why we want to have a strong economy. But for too long, government bureaucracy just builds and builds and builds. Well, it's time for governments to actually get out of the way and allow the private sector to invest, innovate, and employ. And as I said at the start, every decision from, at least from my end, outside of the health support, is about keeping businesses in business, people in jobs, and that's going to be the focus. And the tax system is certainly an inhibitor to jobs growth and economic growth. And as I said, it's not about this being an opportunity to work with the Commonwealth on tax reform. We have an obligation to do it.
One of the arguments we've been making is that economies come back from recessions different. Not everything comes back the way it was. And that one of the ironic consequences of Australia navigating the GFC so successfully is that it skipped a recession. So it's probably in for an extra large dose of structural adjustment in the economy. So I'm bundling together several questions here, but people are curious about your thoughts, your guesses about which sectors might not come back to their former size or might be slow, and where you see possibility for new sectors to emerge.
Well, I think, let me start with the infrastructure, because I think we have been an infrastructure-led economy, and in many ways, it's going to be an infrastructure-led recovery. And I'm currently working on our pipeline of projects at the moment and looking at ways in which we can bring forth shovel-ready, screwdriver-ready projects that we can gear up quickly to get as many people in work. And that doesn't mean that's going to come at the expense of bigger projects, not at all. That's going to be the foundation of the city shaping infrastructure investment that's important, needs to be maintained. We have at around $9 billion. Our projection is around a $9 billion drop in revenue in the next financial year. So it's navigating this challenge from a fiscal perspective into the economic perspective. It's going to be a balancing act, but that work is currently in train and will be announced shortly. Look, in terms of, we want to get hospitality in some of those areas. We've had significant drop off in the workforce due to closures. We want to get back up and running as quickly as possible. You've got the JobKeeper program that's in place for 6 months, but the work has to happen now so that we can transition out of that. We can't wait 6 months to the expiry of the JobKeeper program and then say, okay, now let's get everything back on track. That's just not how it's going to work. We've got to get it as much open as quickly as possible to gear up to that position, so that those businesses are able to then just transition out of the public support and go into the private contribution. So that's the focus there. Look, I think in terms of other industries, this is really going to change the way that we live and we work, and that could be a very positive thing. If you look at the digitisation, which I think is going to be crucial, not just in government, but in the private sector as well. I think that's going to have a substantial benefit to the way businesses operate. I think where many businesses are now being forced into innovating in new ways of thinking that they would never have had before this pandemic. And I think we're not going to be able to take pre-pandemic thinking into a post-pandemic world. It's going to be a different place, but it can be a different place for the better. With every challenge, there's opportunities off the back of it. So there'll be very different. There's going to be a very different type of work-life balance situation that we're going to be facing into, and that provides opportunities, as I said. But then at the same time, trade investment that will probably shift. The education exports as well. We're already working with the university sector on how we deal with making sure that our strong university sector not just survives but thrives. And there's a lot of work going on across a whole lot of work streams here. So the fundamentals of the New South Wales economy were incredibly sound going into this, and they will be incredibly strong coming out of it. but it provides a time for us to reflect and work on where those opportunities might lie. The other thing I'd say here is look at, and this goes to government as well in terms of getting out of the way. You look at some of the restrictions that have been removed in terms of regulation and red tape on 24-hour trade, pharmacies operating around the clock, pubs being able to have takeouts. There's things like this were apparently seen to be controversial. World was going to end if you did this. Nothing's changed. Life in this space has been completely fine. So I think it's a great example where when government starts this position of no, you can't do that, and we've got these organised agencies within government just build up bureaucracies. We actually sit there and say, well, hold on, maybe we could just cut things down a little bit and allow businesses better opportunities. You'll actually see that it's not so bad.
All right, a lot of questions about taxes and debt and fiscal capacity that I'll bundle together here. On the one hand, you want to keep taxes as low as you can. It's a liberal government. All the obvious reasons people don't want to give away all their money. On the other hand, there is a need to repair the safety net. There is a need for government to lead the recovery through investments in things like infrastructure. And there is a need for a high fiscal capacity simply to pay back the debt. How do you balance those two?
Well, it's a challenge, but I'm more focused on the economy than I am on the budget. Debt is cheap. There were concerns earlier on in the pandemic about liquidity, but our access to debt markets is strong, and we're continuing to issue bonds, and that remains strong. But there's no doubt we're going to borrow, and we are going to continue to build. And I've spent the last few years as Treasurer cutting taxes, and that's my intention is to continue that. No government has ever taxed its way to prosperity. I'm not going to talk about the rhetoric of regulation and red tape. This is about trying to practice it, and I want to free up cash flow for businesses to be able to invest and keep people in work. Now that means I want to borrow more, but as I said, debt is cheap. So in terms of the timing of this, that it makes perfect sense for us to follow that path. Obviously, we want to get the budget back into surplus over time, and we'll work through that. But if the economy's, the fiscal position of the state is downstream from the economy, so if the economy is going well and people are back in work, that's going to be better for the budget in the long term. At the same time, in terms of the infrastructure investment, as I said earlier, that's been our state's success, and it will be our state's success into the future. There's also our asset recycling. People have opposed our asset recycling initiatives. Well, that's put us in a very strong position to deal with this pandemic. If I look at other state jurisdictions, their debt levels were nowhere near as strong as our state's perspective, and that has given us the capacity to borrow more at this time, whereas other states may not be in that position because they haven't made better use of their assets. And I know those reforms have been controversial, but it's enabled us to unlock capital to invest in infrastructure and have, just until recently, a negative net debt position, which now allows us to use that as an avenue to continue to invest. So it's a combination of a whole range of factors. We have a scoping study underway for the Sydney Motorway Corporation. People said we should stop the scoping study. I think that's what Labor's called for. I don't know why we would. That would be premature. And this is not about making rash decisions. It's about making sure that every decision we make over the course of this period of time is in the best interest of the taxpayers of our state. So in essence, the answer to your question is there'll be a range of factors. It's going to be a range of borrowing, a range of asset recycling, fiscal prudence from the budget position, and making sure that, this week there's been the discussion in relation to public sector wages. Now, the government hasn't made a decision in relation to that. We provided 2.5% pay increases each year for the last 8 years. And this is at a time, I know there was a bit of opposition to that this week, but we've got to be, the reality is 90% of the state's workforce in the private sector. The private sector creates the wealth that the public sector spends. And at a time when we're looking down, jobs numbers come out today, but we're looking down the track at up to a 10% unemployment rate in the state. A number of people are taking pay cuts. I need to make sure we balance that with our wages policy here in this state. So it's going to be fiscal discipline must continue. Our asset recycling approach should also continue in circumstances where it's in the best interest of the state and gets value for the taxpayers, that we can unlock capital and at the same time borrowing at record low rates of interest on debt. But importantly, at a time where our debt position here is incredibly manageable, given where we came from coming into this pandemic.
All right, there's so many good questions. There are hundreds of people on this meeting and dozens of amazing questions. So I'll ask this one. A lot of people asking about whether anything in this experience makes you want to rethink infrastructure investments that have previously been prioritized, either because of more working from home means mobility flows will be different. London just put in £2 billion for cycleways to try to deal with the reduced willingness to get onto trains. Some people are questioning motorway investments, others are questioning public transport investments. Do you think any changes emerge from this?
I think there will be certainly changes in terms of the way that governments invest in infrastructure, and it would be unwise not to reflect on what societal changes will come, not just, probably less focused during the pandemic, but post-pandemic, about how the world looks. And we've made a substantial investment when it comes to cycleways here in our state. I think we're investing around $600 million over the next 4 years. And in fact, I was just talking to Minister Stokes the other day about that and where are further opportunities in terms of investing in open spaces. But yeah, I mean, look, we're still going to have our three cities vision is there. We want to make sure we're building our state for generations to come. Our borders will open again at some point in time, and tourism will come flooding back. But it's a time to turbocharge the state. And when it comes to looking, and right now I'm looking through the pipeline and where is the right balance in terms of project prioritization. But getting some of what you don't want to do here as well is have a building education revolution on your hands, where you just go, I just want to get projects out the door that end up building projects for schools that they never ever wanted. It's making sure the projects that we choose during the time of their construction are immediately able to increase job growth and can be easily scalable, so we can scale them up and get people in work quickly. But also projects that have a great social benefit out the other side. So that is in public transport, that would potentially be in cycleways, in social housing, for example. There's been some commentary around social housing. I see social housing as a real, social and affordable housing as a real opportunity. We've announced some measures already in that space, but I think that's certainly an area where we can invest in some projects that will have a great benefit to the people of our state at the other side. But it would be very unwise. It'd be very unwise for governments to not reflect on what a changing natured workforce would be at the other side, and making sure that the infrastructure investment matches community need. And that's certainly front and center. So at the start, you can't just sit there and continue public policy along the same lines as it was in a pre-pandemic world. It's going to be a very different place, and we've got to make sure our policy matches where we're at.
All right, Treasurer, we are out of time. Everybody, I wish I could have gotten to all of your questions, but you know how it goes.
Well, Gabriel, if they want to send them through to the office, if anyone out there wants to send them to the office over the course of the day, more than happy to get some answers back to people by 5 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you very much for your time and for everything you are doing to lead the recovery.
Thanks very much, Gabriel. Thanks, everyone.
Everyone, we'll see you at the next Committee for Sydney Live. Have a good day.